Howdy team, happy Thursday. I hope you guys are having a great week. I am all sorts of excited about jumping on the plane tomorrow to head to Colorado. So y'all definitely be praying for Melvin and I as we're leading the team this week. It's going to be a great time. But it's crossover Sunday, so y'all get ready for that. Remember, you've got guys and girls in your classes. It'll be a really, really great time. Um, Several things about this lesson that I want to jump into, so let's get involved. Number one, option two is awesome, particularly because we're in mixed company. That'll just be fun. It'll be interactive and funny, undoubtedly. It's totally okay to have guys and girls trying to stand up together. I think that'll just be a really great time. And the questions are pretty good in that one, too. So have them do option two. That'll just be fun. Let's talk about famine. Now, I'm going to cover some stuff with y'all that doesn't even kind of come up in the lesson, but I really think it gives you some insight. For starters, read the entire book of Ruth. It'll bless you. It won't take you long, 20 minutes tops, I bet. Probably got time to read it twice. But the whole book's phenomenal, and we're covering the whole book in one lesson. But the thing about famine you need to remember, particularly in the Old Testament, when it comes to Israel, famine is always the result of their faithlessness. When they begin to follow other gods or just ignore him completely, God starts taking food away. Food slash, and think this is also, most people are farmers. This is their jobs. So God's tightening their pocketbooks and taking food off the table. It's to get their attention. So famine comes to the land, and this family, Elimelech and his wife, Naomi, and their two sons, which we're going to talk more about in a second, they split. They just take off. What you need to catch, and I think this is important, it's not just that they're running for their lives. They're literally fleeing God's judgment. This is like, if your kids if you say to your kids, come here for a spanking, and they take off running in the other direction, judgment is still going to come. They're just doing some running, and this is what's going on here with this family. All right, so they split. They're avoiding judgment. The other thing is when they get to Moab, they continue to disobey God. Both of their sons married foreign women, and the Bible is explicit about this. They're not supposed to marry foreign women, specifically unless they become proselytes, which is going to be important too when we come back up. And there's no record whatsoever that gives us any indication that these two ladies begin to follow Yahweh as a result of their marriage. If anything, this family continued to just disregard and ignore God. Nonetheless, though, grace is going to show up in a magnificent way. But I just think those are helpful contexts for kids to understand. This wasn't like just a random thing. These people are running from the Lord. They're continuing to disobey God, and yet something amazing is about to happen. Menon and Chilean, and I'm sure I'm mispronouncing those names, but that doesn't matter so much. It is interesting to know, though. Melon's name means sickly, and Chilean's name means suffering. Those boys sound like real prizes, right? But I do think it's interesting that they were both married for 10 years and neither one of them had kids. That's not at all normal in their situation. And maybe it was because both of them were sickly people. I have no idea. I really think this is, again, just God's way of getting their attention. But nonetheless, they didn't have any kids for 10 years. Now, back over to Israel. The students are going to think that the idea of a kinsman redeemer is pretty weird, specifically that idea of, okay, your husband's died, so you have to marry his brother. My wife and I have talked about this concept on more than one occasion, and she said with no uncertain terms, I'm so glad this doesn't apply to us anymore because I could not marry one of your brothers. And I, of course, just laugh and even jokingly say, yeah, I wouldn't marry one of your sisters either. But the beauty of this custom, though, and it's not even a custom, the beauty of God's law in this, though, was it was God's way of providing for orphans and widows, and even to ensure that a family name wasn't lost. And that's just really, really gracious of God. The other way that shows up, this concept shows up, is the law said specifically in Leviticus 19. It talks about when you're harvesting grains, you're not supposed to harvest the exterior of your fields. So if you're mowing your lawn, just think about leaving that one last swipe of your lawn not mowed. You would just let that grow and grow and grow. In this case, it would be barley or wheat or whatever it is that you're growing, corn maybe. You would leave that up. And as you're harvesting, anything that fell to the ground, you weren't allowed to pick it up. And the principle of that was very simple. It was for the poor and for foreigners. And so the idea is just this: God does not leave anybody behind. God doesn't forget about people, even those that we would maybe consider less important. God doesn't at all see it that way. So he had these interesting things, even what we would consider to be weird or outrageous concepts in his law, but he did that because he loves us. And he loves not just us, but he loves those that are seemingly unlovable as well. Now, back to Naomi. When she gets back to Bethlehem, people see her, Naomi, Naomi, you've returned. And they see that she's returning empty-handed. She has no husband. She has no sons. And she immediately says to them, listen, God took my husband. God took my boys. God has made me bitter. And just think about that. I mean, really slow down and consider what she's saying here. God's made me bitter. I'm bitter at God. And she is respectful. She still calls him the Almighty. She recognizes it's his hand at work, but she's bitter about it. And she's got seemingly a lot to be bitter about. Think about if you lost your husband and your sons and you have no grandsons. You have an adopted daughter now, but having an adopted daughter who, by the way, is a foreigner from a land that Israel has been at war against and even has been enslaving the nation of Israel for some time, that's not going to help her very much. And so she says, yeah, God's made me bitter. I'm aggravated about this. We ignore God, fell under God's judgment, just like everybody else fell under God's judgment. And yet, here's what you see. God shows up and is so gracious to her and to Ruth. Ruth's a foreigner. Now, Ruth has become a proselyte. Remember, she says specifically, your God's my God now. I'm going to follow Jehovah, which is amazing considering thus far her interactions with the Lord have not been very pleasant, right? So she knows what's right. Your God's going to be my God. I'm going to follow him. So she's a proselyte now. She's a ungenetic Jew. And then God begins to just be so gracious to them. He provides for Ruth. He provides for Naomi. He gives them the food they need. And then he brings this kinsman redeemer, this very, very godly man, who, by the way, is the son of a foreigner, the son of a former prostitute, a man that would have been full of compassion for a foreign woman, who would have been the former husband or the former wife of another man. Many people would see that as undesirable. She's no longer a virgin. She can't have kids, clearly. And he just looks past all that. He sees what God sees. And so he lovingly redeems this woman. He makes her his wife. And the happy ending, if you want to call this, is Ruth becomes the great-grandmother of the second king of Israel. It's an amazing thing. God is so gracious to us, and we so often just ignore that. So see these points in here and really trumpet that to our students this Sunday, that God provides, God is gracious, and he really is always thinking ahead. And even when we are so faithless, he is faithful. So, guys, I love y'all. I'll see you later.